Welcome to Midnight Whispers, where the night doesn't whisper, it warns. As you lie in the safety of your bed, imagine footsteps in the forest, eyes watching from behind the trees, and truths too terrifying to ignore. These aren't just stories, they're echoes from the shadows, real accounts whispered under breath by those who survived. So close your eyes, but don't fall asleep too fast. The darkness remembers. What if your innocent high school curiosity opened a door you could never close? Tonight, we begin with a chilling account of a Ouija board game that spiraled into a years-long nightmare, where every creak and whisper became a terrifying reality. Would you dare to face it? This all unfolded when I was in high school, living in my parents' house. I'd always felt a certain sensitivity to the paranormal, always been captivated by ghost stories and horror movies. But this house? It amplified everything to an entirely new level. So, when two of my closest friends proposed using a Ouija board, my initial response was, of course, a resounding yes. Looking back, it was hardly my wisest decision. We ventured out late that night to the small-town cemetery nestled right in the middle of town. A cemetery in the dead of winter in Nebraska with a Ouija board. We were practically inviting trouble. We didn't dwell on the specifics of the session itself because what happened afterwards was truly spooky. But know this, we heard a child's unsettling laughter, and we made contact with what appeared to be a genuine Ouija board demon. It was enough to ensure I never wanted to touch one again. The terrifying activity in my house began the very night I returned home, and I had no doubt it was directly connected to that fateful board. My brother and I had our rooms in the basement, sharing a wall. It was bitterly cold, and in the basement, we relied on a small infrared heater on wheels. That first night, I distinctly heard the heater rolling across the linoleum floor. But having watched enough horror films, I knew the golden rule: never investigate the spooky noise. So I lay frozen, hidden beneath my blankets, utterly terrified. That was just the beginning. As time wore on, things only intensified. Do you remember those old metal pencil sharpeners you'd crank? Our house had one mounted on a pillar outside my room, and it began to rotate by itself at night, just like the heater. Then, inside my room, a simple mason jar on my dresser, located inside my closet, started moving, back and forth, hour after hour. I was so convinced I shouldn't acknowledge it that I never even looked directly at it. The longer I ignored it, the more aggressive the mason jar became. One particularly harrowing morning, after a night of relentless movement, I finally looked. There were undeniable scrapes on the wooden dresser surface, carved by the mason jar's relentless motion. I was completely unraveled, yet still hadn't dared to speak to my family. They believed in the paranormal, but had always insisted the house was fine, so I didn't want to upset the delicate balance. But the phenomena continued to escalate. Now, there was a persistent tapping on the wooden paneling right next to my head on the wall. Could you imagine waking up to that? Night after night? Then came the unsettling physical sensation. That distinct feeling of a cat jumping onto your bed and walking around, searching for a spot to settle. But there was no cat. Just an invisible weight, shifting, moving. And to make matters worse, I started hearing my name, whispered from inside my closet, every single night. It's chilling even to recall it now, the profound fear it instilled. On my left, I had a large wooden bookcase topped with an old, cheap, flat-screen television. Its buttons, on the back, were audibly clicked when pressed. Those buttons started pressing themselves at night, too. By this point, I was a total mess. Sounds of the heater and sharpener, wall taps, whispers, television buttons, and something crawling onto my bed. My breaking point arrived one night with a hyper-realistic nightmare. I was in my room, looking around. In the corner of my closet, a little girl huddled. By my bed, a little boy pressed down on it. Behind my bookcase, a shadow man loomed near the television, and another shadow man stood in the opposite corner, tapping on the wall. It was absolutely petrifying. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I started describing the nightmare to my brother, and, as he listened, his eyes went wide. He interrupted me, describing, with terrifying accuracy, the little boy pressing on my bed. We had experienced the exact same nightmare. Then I confessed everything else that had been happening. He nodded along, confirming he heard the heater, the pencil sharpener, and the whispers too. But then he dropped a bombshell. He said, "I was whispering along with the entities." I was dumbfounded. He explained he'd seen me sitting bolt upright in bed, talking in my sleep to whatever was in my room, something I have zero memory of. All of that was scary enough, right? But it gets worse. Across the basement from my brother's room was a storage room, doorless. That room always gave me a deeply unsettling feeling, a deep-seated repulsion I couldn't explain. My brother's room faced it. He told me he'd wake up at night and see dark shadows, like a man, standing in that doorway. Sometimes he'd be halfway to my brother's room. Sometimes he'd be standing in my bedroom doorway, staring at me. He said the man never stepped inside my room, and I never saw him myself. What would you do if your own brother confirmed your deepest fears, and then some, adding a layer of terror you hadn't even conceived? I was terrified, but strangely, a little relieved to know I wasn't alone. We finally told our parents. My dad was skeptical, but my mom admitted she sometimes heard whispering from downstairs and even heard someone yell, "Mom," from my bedroom when she was home alone. After we spoke up, the activity seemed to lessen. But I remember one chilling instance when my boyfriend, now husband, was visiting. As my brother and I recounted our experiences, he suddenly asked us to stop, complaining of a terrible headache. The moment we ceased speaking, the headache vanished. I don't know exactly how everything finally stopped. I eventually moved into an apartment, and though I had a few minor incidents, like all 3 clocks in different rooms falling off the walls and shattering simultaneously, I haven't experienced anything of that magnitude since. My mom and brother confirmed that the very night I moved out, all activity in that house stopped completely. Literally, the first night I was no longer living there. I don't know if I left those entities behind, but I'm eternally grateful they're not with me anymore. As we unravel the layers of one person's horrifying reality, remember this feeling of unease. Because our next stories delve into the unsettling consequences when unseen entities decide to make a rented house their chilling playground, and a simple game turns into a direct warning. Have you ever felt a presence in an empty room? Or witnessed an object move with no logical explanation? Our next tales plunge you into homes where the line between reality and the supernatural completely dissolves, from glowing orbs to objects moving on their own and a chilling direct warning. My family rented a house for 3 years, from the time I was 10 until I was 13. It was a nice-sized suburban home, built in the mid-52nd, and when we moved in, it was already furnished, complete with a lot of mirrors my family hadn't placed. I'd later hear some spiritual people say that you should never have second-hand mirrors, as you don't know what they've seen, perhaps something bad attached to them. My first bedroom had a desk, and I was doing homework, probably around 10 years old. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man in black, walking slightly behind me. I only saw him from his shoulders to his wrists, just in my peripheral vision, and then he was gone. I turned, but there was nothing there, just my own reflection. Yet I felt a profound sense that something was wrong. I tried to go back to my homework, but the unease was overwhelming. I grabbed my things and ran downstairs. The next time, I was sitting at a table. Again, out of my peripheral vision, I saw something. This time, a woman wearing dark pink and purple fleece. I knew it was a woman because I saw half her torso, chest, shoulder, and arms. But when I turned, once more, no one was there. Things intensified after I switched rooms with my mom. In my old room, I hadn't been sleeping well. I started sleepwalking. My neck and back constantly ached from the bed, and I became incredibly ill. I had the stomach flu for a week, so severe it landed me in the hospital overnight for rehydration and IV medication. Strangely, the moment I was in the hospital, connected to the IV, I stopped throwing up and recovered within a day. Could it have been the room itself making me sick? After moving into my new room, one night, everyone else was asleep, but unlike them, I kept my door open. I woke to a light illuminating the hallway. At first, I wasn't scared. I felt almost at peace, but then it got brighter and began moving towards my room. Once I saw the full thing, my stomach dropped and my blood ran cold. It was a large orb of shining light, moving entirely on its own. I don't know why, but I was so terrified. I could tell it was sentient. It stopped right at my door frame, as if it realized I was awake and staring at it, and I just knew it was staring back. I was frozen. I felt my life was truly in danger. I couldn't bear to look anymore, so I pulled my blanket over my head and waited for something terrible to happen. Eventually, I fell back asleep, and when I woke, it was gone. Everything seemed fine again. What would you make of a glowing, sentient orb appearing in your hallway? The next experience happened while my family and I were watching the Elisa Lam documentary on Netflix. Before we'd finished, my grandmother and I made a makeshift Ouija board from cardboard, using a shot glass as the planchette. We actually summoned a spirit. Or at least I believe we did. Because when we asked if it was the goth guy from the documentary, it said no. The next day, when we finished the documentary, it confirmed the goth guy had been cleared. However, my grandmother made a crucial mistake. When we were done talking to the spirit, I told her we needed to say goodbye properly. But she lifted her fingers off the glass and simply said goodbye, without moving the glass to the goodbye first. I told her we had to fix it quickly, so we tried again, doing it the right way. I thought everything was fine, but the next day, I woke up and the fridge was leaking water. We called the landlord. He sent a repairman, but they had no idea what was wrong, why it was leaking, or where the leak was coming from. Eventually, it just stopped by itself. Then the footsteps in the attic started. I'd hear footsteps and rustling many times throughout the day. I was so convinced someone was up there that I had my aunt go look, but no one was. I'd also hear footsteps walking around upstairs, even when I was home alone. Have you ever felt such an unnerving presence in your own home? Then, the landlord decided he wanted to move back in, so we left. After that, everything stopped. The footsteps, the breaking things, the sightings of entities and partial people, the extreme illness, everything. In the house I live in now, none of it happens. Oh, and I forgot to mention earlier, but after switching rooms with my mom, our house became infested with stink bugs. Winter and summer, they were always there. Eventually, I discovered they were congregating in my room. When I pulled back the curtain, the entire thing was filled with stink bugs. I had never seen an infestation like that before, and eventually, I moved bedrooms again. If anyone can help me understand what all of this was, especially that glowing orb and the stink bugs, I would certainly appreciate it. Our next story transports us back to childhood, where a simple game took a dark turn. The first time I ever used a Ouija board, I was 11. It was a rainy afternoon, and my two friends, Katie and Taylor, and I were hanging out at Katie's house. At some point, Katie's older sister, Lauren, and her friend Sam called us upstairs, saying they had something to show us. When we got to Lauren's room, they were sitting cross-legged on the floor with a talking board between them. It was pink and sparkly with a cartoon kitten in the middle. Definitely not what we expected a Ouija board to look like. We laughed, but they insisted we try it. We all sat down in a circle and placed our fingers lightly on the planchette. Within seconds, it began to move, fast. It slid smoothly across the board and spelled out one word: R-U-N. Katie, Taylor, and I all yanked our hands back at once, completely freaked out. Lauren and Sam burst out laughing, saying they'd made it move to frighten us. Katie got mad and started yelling, accusing them of being immature. But before anyone could respond, the bathroom light across the hall flicked off, and then a second later turned back on. Everyone froze. Taylor tried to brush it off. "Okay, you got us. We're done now." But this time, Lauren and Sam weren't laughing. They looked pale and tense. Something had shifted. Then the planchette started to slide across the board again, but none of us were touching it. It moved slowly and deliberately towards me. I was sitting opposite everyone else, just a few feet back. "Ha ha, very funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You just pushed it with your foot or something." But Lauren and Sam didn't laugh. They didn't even move. They just stared at the board, both their faces drained of color. Sam's mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "That's not us." Then Lauren added, "Guys, go now." We didn't need to be told twice. We bolted downstairs, not bothering to look behind us. Once outside, Taylor and Katie demanded to know if it was another prank, begging them to just admit it. But Lauren and Sam weren't talking. They were on the verge of tears, barely able to breathe, and shaking. Out of instinct, I turned to look up at the bedroom window. The bathroom light switched off again, and then I swear to God, I saw a small, dark figure, about the size of a child, sprinting past the window. There was no one else home. Lauren and Katie's brothers were both away at college. Their dad was at work. Their mom's still out running errands. That room should have been empty. What would you do if a game turned from a prank into an undeniable, terrifying reality? That night, Katie and Taylor slept over at my place. Lauren stayed with Sam. And no one mentioned what happened again. Not once. We never brought it up, never talked about it, not even years later. Not long after, the three of us, me, Katie, and Taylor, had a major falling out, and I never saw Taylor again. It's been 18 years now. Katie and I reconnected on Instagram recently and chat occasionally, but we've never spoken about that night. And honestly, I'm not sure if I ever want to. From the chilling whispers within rented walls and the immediate terror of a direct warning, we now turn to a more solitary, yet equally terrifying descent into the unknown. What happens when you challenge the veil, alone in the dead of night, or when a friendly game reveals a truly demonic echo? Imagine the silence of your own home, broken by an unseen force, or a game with friends turning into a direct confrontation with something truly malevolent. Are you ready to confront these chilling realities, where the line between skepticism and profound fear is obliterated? Tonight, we delve deeper into the veil, beginning with a solitary venture into the unknown. A listener, living alone in their secluded home, found themselves increasingly fascinated by Ouija boards, though they remained steadfastly skeptical. One quiet November night, around 2 a.m., boredom and a potent mix of curiosity led them to craft a makeshift board from cardboard. With drawn curtains and a single candle casting long, dancing shadows, painting the room in an eerie glow, they began. The atmosphere was already unnervingly quiet, amplifying the silence within. "Is someone here?" they whispered into the heavy stillness, every nerve on edge. Initially, nothing. Just a stubborn, unsettling quiet that deepened their sense of anticipation and dread. Then, without warning, a sharp, metallic bang jolted them. The metal latch on the door rattled violently, and a fleeting shadow, distinct and terrifying, flickered beneath the door, as if something substantial had just moved past. Pure, unadulterated terror flooded their senses. Their immediate, instinctual reaction was to halt everything. They blew out the candle, plunging the room into absolute, disorienting darkness. Struggling to remember where their phone lay, scrambling desperately to find the light switch, that's when something else happened. It was fleeting, yes, but undeniably real. The distinct sound of rapid footsteps. Not their own, for they were wearing socks, and their movements were muffled to near silence. But these were the unmistakable sounds of someone running, only for a brief, terrifying moment, directly towards them. Panic seized them, visceral and immediate. As soon as they finally found the switch and flooded the room with light, they grabbed their phone and bolted. They fled the room, retreating to the perceived safety of their bed. But sleep was impossible after that. Their mind raced, replaying the events, consumed by what had just taken place. Eventually, they managed to doze off, but the unsettling experiences weren't over. 2 nights later, they awoke in a daze, disoriented and profoundly disturbed, to find themselves standing in the outside corridor of their house. It's possible they had sleepwalked, but the realization sent a shiver down their spine, a terrifying loss of control over their own body and actions. They quickly returned inside, locked the door, and haven't touched a Ouija board since. Can you imagine the sheer vulnerability of facing such inexplicable terror alone in your own home? The feeling of losing control over your own movements, your own reality, haunted by the memory of those unseen footsteps? From the chilling isolation of a solo encounter, our journey now intensifies, moving into the shared terror of a high school group in the early 2002. For them, Ouija boards became a regular, unsettling pastime, fueled by a shared fascination with the supernatural. Their very first session was a stark, unforgettable warning. They were deep in conversation with the board when, suddenly, a profound, almost suffocating wave of intense cold swept through the room. This wasn't just a slight chill. It was a powerful, creeping cold that seemed to rise from the very floorboards and permeate every fiber of the air. A cold so intense, it felt like it was seeping into their bones. It was so jarring, one friend, visibly spooked, instinctively grabbed his hunting knife, which he happened to have nearby. Even his normally calm and collected dog bolted from the room, tail tucked firmly between its legs, a clear sign that something deeply unnatural was occurring. When they cautiously asked the board if it had caused the sudden temperature drop, the planchette moved deliberately, spelling out the chilling reason. It wanted them to feel how it had died, by drowning in icy water. The visceral intensity of that cold, coupled with the specificity of the answer, left them profoundly shaken, but also undeniably convinced. They continued. On another occasion, a friend was deeply grieving her cousin's recent suicide, and she desperately wanted to try and connect with him through the board. To eliminate any possibility of subconscious manipulation, they made her agree not to physically touch the planchette. Yet, to their astonishment, the board miraculously began to spell out uncannily accurate and deeply private details about her cousin. It revealed his full name, his girlfriend's name, their college, and even specific, graphic details about how he took his life that were known only to the police and his closest family members. Asterisk content warning. This story contains details about suicide that some viewers may find disturbing. Please exercise caution if you are sensitive to such topics. Asterisk. This chilling revelation suggested something far, far beyond their collective imaginations was at play. Imagine the absolute terror of hearing such intimate, painful, and highly confidential details confirmed by an unseen, disembodied force. What would you do if an entity could pull information directly from the deepest, most guarded corners of your reality, confirming your deepest fears or your most profound sorrows? The physical manifestations continued to escalate, making it impossible to deny the presence they had invited. When they decided to ask an entity if it was physically present in the room, the planchette sharply and unequivocally pointed to a specific corner. And at that very instant, all the flames of the candles they had lit, positioned strategically around the room, flickered violently and dramatically shifted in that exact direction. It was a simultaneous and undeniable occurrence that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up, a clear, direct response from something unseen. From then on, that corner became an unspoken, forbidden zone during their sessions, a place they instinctively avoided. But the most profoundly unsettling revelation, the one that still haunts the storyteller to this day, came when one of their more religious friends suggested they try contacting their guardian angels. One by one, each person's angel revealed itself, each with names that sounded distinctly biblical and comforting. Then it was the storyteller's turn. The name that emerged was utterly, horrifically different. It resonated with an ancient, distinctly demonic feel, echoing names like Pazuzu, Lamashtu, Ale, or Beelzebub, names steeped in a darker, older lore. Despite being an atheist raised Catholic, with no inherent belief in demons, something about this name unsettled them to their very core. They refused to speak it aloud, unlike their friends who voiced their own angels' names. The mere presence of that name, once revealed, felt palpable, almost like an oppressive awareness, as if they were being watched with the ever-present eye of Sauron. The storyteller describes feeling a profound, lasting psychological impact from that moment forward, a deep-seated unease that never fully left them. They felt a tangible shift in their very perception, an inexplicable awareness of a malevolent presence leading to significant behavioral changes they couldn't control, episodes of irritability, nastiness towards friends with no memory of it, and intense mood swings that left those close to them deeply concerned. The uncertainty of who or what they were truly communicating with has left them weary, even years later. Their husband keeps a Ouija board in their basement, but the storyteller refuses to be present whenever he and his friends decide to use it, unable to bring themselves to relive those unsettling experiences. What kind of entity presents itself as a guardian angel with a name that chills you to your core? How deeply can these interactions affect your life, your psyche, long after the board is put away, lingering like a malevolent shadow on your soul? These deeply personal encounters reveal just how easily the boundaries can blur when one invites the unknown. The psychological toll, the profound sense of vulnerability, and the lasting fear are undeniable. But what happens when multiple people, diverse in belief and intent, come together not just to dabble, but to truly stir the pot, often ignoring the very spiritual rules meant to protect them? Our next segment plunges into the unpredictable and often terrifying outcomes of collective rituals, where fundamental rules are broken and unimaginable consequences unfold before their very eyes. Tonight, we witness the terrifying consequences when groups of friends, fueled by curiosity, push the boundaries of the paranormal, leading to terrifying physical manifestations and chilling, Unseen confrontations. Our first account plunges us into a seemingly innocent summer evening, where a homemade Ouija board became a conduit for something truly malevolent, reminding us that some doors, once opened, are impossible to close. This harrowing experience unfolded a few summers ago. 5 friends, brimming with that unique blend of youthful invincibility and curious bravado, decided to build their own Ouija board. The chosen battleground, a friend's house, steeped in its own quiet mystique. As the summer night deepened, the curtains were drawn, plunging the room into an expectant hush, broken only by the flickering dance of 5 humble candles. The air felt thick, charged with anticipation and nervous energy. The storyteller, harboring a lifelong fascination with the paranormal, approached the session with a distinct blend of belief and skepticism. Part of him assumed their amateur attempt would yield nothing more than their own imaginations. They began, as tradition dictated, politely introducing themselves, fingers resting lightly on the makeshift planchette. Initially, the responses were nothing but nonsensical jumbles of letters, confirming the storyteller's initial suspicion someone, or everyone, was subconsciously moving it. This, he thought, was the ideomotor effect in action. But then, the atmosphere shifted. The random movements of the planchette coalesced into coherent, direct answers. A tangible weight settled in the room. A collective breath held as the chilling realization dawned. They had made contact. After a series of hesitant questions, a sharp, piercing scream tore through the silence. One friend, his face stark white, pointed towards the staircase. 3 of them, including the storyteller, had their backs to the stairs, completely oblivious. But the other 2 confirmed his terror. They'd seen it. A fleeting, indistinct figure, peeking over the railing, vanished as quickly as it appeared. A knot of pure dread tightened in the storyteller's stomach. They had sought the supernatural, but its actual manifestation sent a profound shiver of genuine apprehension down his spine. But the experience was far from over. Moments later, the lights in the adjacent, empty bathroom began to flicker erratically. On, off, on, off. There was no logical explanation. No one in the room. No loose wiring. It was a rhythmic, unsettling display that screamed of an unseen presence. This was their breaking point. A raw, instinctual panic began to seize them, and in that heightened state of fear, they committed the cardinal sin of Ouija board etiquette. Without uttering the customary goodbye, without moving the planchette to the goodbye etched on their board, they abruptly yanked their fingers off. Driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, they rushed to investigate the bathroom, scene of the inexplicable light show. Of course, it was utterly vacant, offering no clues or explanation. A strange cocktail of relief and unease remained, but the pull was too strong. Despite their recent terror, a strange compulsion drew them back to the Ouija board. They attempted to re-establish contact, their trembling fingers hovering over the planchette once more. Initially, there was nothing but silence, and the steady flicker of the remaining candles. And then, without discernible draft or external influence, 3 of the 5 candles abruptly snuffed themselves out, plunging a significant portion of the room into deeper, oppressive shadow. The sudden darkness was punctuated by an even more startling occurrence. The plastic lighter they'd been using, which had been resting innocently beside the board, suddenly propelled itself. Not a gentle nudge, but a violent, forceful launch, sending it halfway across the hallway. It skittered, bounced, clattered to a stop against the closed door of the very bathroom that had been the source of their earlier terror. That was it. A unanimous decision was reached. They were undeniably, terrifyingly out of their depth. The playful curiosity that had initiated their experiment had been replaced by a genuine, overwhelming fear. With trembling voices, they finally remembered the importance of proper closure, collectively whispering goodbye to whatever they had disturbed. Seeking solace, they called other friends, hoping to drown out the oppressive shadows with familiar sounds and friendly faces. Yet, even with the arrival of their friends, the unsettling events weren't entirely over. Later, the lights upstairs, in a part of the house that should have been unoccupied, flickered independently. And when some of them ventured upstairs to turn them off, several of the lights inexplicably switched themselves off before they could even be reached. This night remains etched in the storyteller's memory, a vivid and unsettling experience that never fails to send a shiver down his spine. It was a brutal lesson in playing with forces they didn't understand, a stark reminder that some rules are broken at one's own peril. From that terrifying summer night, we shift our focus to an even deeper confrontation with the unknown, where skepticism clashes with undeniable reality, and the consequences are quite literally screamed from the depths of the earth. During his freshman year at BSU, back in 1989, our next storyteller was an ardent amateur paranormal investigator, but primarily a debunker. His goal was always to seek logical explanations first, reserving the possibility of the paranormal only when conventional reasoning completely fell short. This meticulous approach shaped his worldview. Then he met Leah. Leah possessed an old Ouija board, one she claimed had a dark and sinister history, supposedly crafted by a satanic witch. This, naturally, piqued our debunker's interest. One evening, before dinner, they decided to experiment with the board in Leah's room. The session began typically, the planchette gliding across letters and numbers in response to their inquiries. After some time, Leah's mother called them down for dinner, bringing their session to an end. They carefully placed the Ouija board back into its box. In a seemingly casual gesture, Leah then tossed the boxed board onto her dresser, where it landed directly on top of her Catholic Bible. They then proceeded downstairs to eat, putting the board and their session out of mind. What awaited them upon their return was startling. As they re-entered Leah's room, the Ouija board was no longer on the dresser. It lay on her bed, the planchette resting ominously on its surface. The box that had contained the board was now on the floor. Even more peculiar was the fate of the Bible. It had fallen from the dresser and landed squarely in the waste paper basket beside it. It's crucial to note that Leah and her mother were the sole occupants of the house. Her father had passed away years prior, and she had no siblings. This eliminated any possibility of another person having staged this unsettling scene. The inexplicable repositioning of the Ouija board and the Catholic Bible deeply unnerved Leah. She declared that she wanted to rid herself of the object immediately. As fate would have it, they were scheduled to attend a Catholic youth group retreat the following weekend as chaperones. Leah resolved to take the Ouija board with her to the retreat, planning to dispose of it in the large bonfire that was traditionally part of the event. True to her word, that is precisely what they did. Upon explaining the situation to the priest overseeing the retreat, he was initially hesitant, his skepticism mirroring our narrator's own. However, he eventually, and reluctantly, granted them permission to burn the board, stipulating that they should do so discreetly and avoid making a spectacle of it for the high school students present. As Leah stepped forward and tossed the Ouija board into the roaring flames, an unsettling, almost primal event occurred. Sounds began to emanate from the nearby woods, noises that could only be described as agonizing screams. While the raw emotion of the moment might have played a role, the sounds were undeniably chilling, reminiscent of someone being burned alive. It was a horrifying symphony of suffering. Understandably shaken, the priest then offered a blessing for both of them and for the ashes of the Ouija board, which they subsequently gathered and buried. Fortunately, the remainder of the weekend passed without any further unusual occurrences. Leah and her mother also reported no subsequent issues at their home. However, the piercing screams that echoed from the woods that night remained a vivid and deeply disturbing memory. It was a sound that was never repeated during the rest of the night or the following day, leaving them with a lingering sense of unease and a first-hand experience that obliterated the lines between skepticism and the terrifyingly real paranormal. Could you imagine witnessing such an undeniable manifestation, feeling the very air vibrate with another's agony? It's the kind of experience that permanently alters your understanding of reality, isn't it? From the eerie silence of the woods, we now plunge into a desperate scenario. A makeshift Ouija board, created within the confines of a mental hospital, where a young life, tragically lost, offers terrifyingly accurate details, only to be replaced by something far more sinister. This is where a desperate attempt to sever a connection goes horribly wrong. Our final story for this segment comes from a young woman who, even as a child, harbored a deep fascination with ghosts, demons, and haunted tales. At around 15, she was introduced to a game called Charlie Charlie. She was skeptical, dismissing it as nonsense, until a photo taken during a session showed an inexplicable red circle around her and her friend. Her skepticism shattered. At 16, her life took a dark turn. After multiple suicide attempts, she was admitted to St. Vincent's, a mental hospital, for several months. Within the structured yet unsupervised environment of the hospital, an unlikely opportunity for the paranormal arose. During recreation time, held in a gym with what looked like an abandoned stage, she and other teenagers discovered a treasure trove of glass bottles and cardboard behind the stage. With the staff largely inattentive, they did the unthinkable. They broke glass bottles and, using cardboard, fashioned their own makeshift Ouija board. They wasted no time. Fingers on the improvised planchette, they began their session. The glass moved. Initially, the storyteller remained skeptical, convinced her fellow teens were moving the piece themselves. Then, something undeniable happened. A boy named CJ began to communicate, and when asked, he revealed her father's middle name, her brother's middle name, and her own. Details she had never ever shared with anyone there. How could they possibly know? Her skepticism evaporated, replaced by chilling awe. For 2 weeks, they continued to talk to CJ. He told them his heartbreaking story. He was 8 years old when he was admitted to that very mental hospital after trying to take his own life due to abuse from his uncle. A short while later, he was successful. He said he saw a light, but refused to cross over, wanting to stay with his family. The story was tragic. The connection felt genuine. But then, CJ was gone. They asked who they were speaking to, and the planchette spelled out a Latin name. A quick search revealed it was something scary, a name she recalls as deeply unsettling. The benign presence of CJ had been replaced by something far more sinister. They knew they had to get rid of the board, but how? They couldn't set it on fire. There was no access to lighters, and they were thoroughly checked before entering the building. In a desperate, improvised act, they ripped the cardboard board into pieces and buried it in the backyard. She admits they had no idea if this was the right way to dispose of it. And it probably wasn't. 6 months later, the storyteller was released from the mental hospital and returned to real school. But her struggles weren't over. The very same day, she was sent back, this time as an inpatient. She describes going insane and dealing with bullying. After 2 weeks as an inpatient, she finally returned home. That's when the truly weird things began. At her parents' house, the heavy living room door, which stuck to the carpet and required a firm push to close, would now slam shut on its own. A few days later, her father recounted a terrifying incident. The bathroom window, a type that couldn't normally slam shut due to a holding mechanism, had violently slammed closed while he was taking a bath. He was baffled, knowing it required deliberate force. When the storyteller shared her own experience with the living room door, her mother's reaction was immediate and terrified. "What games are you playing?" she demanded. "Did you bring the devil into this house?" The storyteller, now completely overwhelmed, confessed everything she had done at St. Vincent's, including the Ouija board. Her mother immediately called her grandmother, who arrived with holy water and performed a thorough blessing of the entire house and everyone in it, paying particular attention to the storyteller's room. From that day on, nothing strange happened again. This isn't just a story. It's a real-life experience, one that profoundly illustrates the dangers of dabbling with the unknown, especially when the rules are broken or simply not fully understood. What do you think about the idea of spiritual rules when interacting with the unseen? Does breaking them truly lead to such profound and terrifying consequences? From the direct confrontations of Ouija boards and the unsettling outcomes of broken rules, our journey now takes an even more diverse turn. Our next segment dives into encounters that defy easy explanation, from unique forms of communication to spectral sightings and lingering presences that stretch over years, long after the initial game is over. What if the paranormal isn't just about Ouija boards? What if it's about chilling encounters in unexpected places, a presence that follows you for years, or even a benevolent ghost that communicates through your radio? Prepare for the truly unexpected as we delve into the most unique and unforgettable tales of the unseen. We begin this final, potent segment with a chilling incident that occurred not through a board, but in a place that awakened something truly malevolent. Our storyteller, a seasoned enthusiast of the paranormal, recounts how their friend, a newcomer to such phenomena, sought to dip their toe into the spectral waters. Their first attempt at a homemade Ouija board was hilariously aborted by a sneeze and a shared scream. But curiosity, as it always does, persisted. Before their actual wooden board arrived, they often visited a quiet park outside of town, a spot known for its clear night skies and proximity to old train tracks and a disused station. On one particular night, as they traversed the familiar path, a sudden, undeniable sensation washed over our narrator. It was a profound sense of evil, an oppressive weight that brought them to an immediate, dead halt. They urged their friend to leave, a stark panic etched on their face, and just as their friend registered the fear, a sound cut through the night, the distinct, disembodied cry of a baby echoing from down the tracks. As they spun around, scrambling away, the chilling wail repeated, louder this time, and impossibly, right behind them. They didn't dare look back, racing to their car, the raw terror of this first undeniable experience searing itself into the friend's memory and pushing our narrator into uncharted depths of fear. They never returned to that park. When their proper Ouija board finally arrived, they chose a different, safer location. The initial skepticism quickly evaporated when the planchette began to move on its own. The storyteller's friend, ever the skeptic, tried to dismiss it, even tapping his fingers to break the connection. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, illuminating their shared space only by the light of their phones, a crucial detail emerged. When they moved the planchette, it made a slight scraping sound against the board. But when it moved on its own, their phone light passed clearly underneath it, hovering just above the surface, making almost no sound at all. It confirmed to them that something else was at play. The board began to count down from 9, a classic warning to end the session, which they immediately heeded, saying their goodbyes. Yet, the entity persisted, answering questions, identifying itself as a spirit, not a ghost, and confirming it had no name. When asked about the terrifying park, the spirit chillingly advised them never to return because it was evil. Months later, our narrator learned a tragic local history from colleagues. The old train station had once been a camp for railroad workers, where children occasionally wandered off and fell into wombat holes, never to be found. The link was undeniable, solidifying the horror of that night. Could you imagine a historical tragedy echoing through time, manifesting as pure malevolence and the cries of the lost? But what happens when curiosity, combined with an open mind, invites something far more insidious into your personal space? Next, we journey to France, where a young college student's Ouija session spiraled into a 2-year struggle against an oppressive, unseen force that didn't just haunt his home, but subtly warped his very being. In 2019, one 8-year-old college student in France, raised atheist but deeply drawn to spiritual research, connected with 2 friends, Antoine and Karim, who shared his spiritual curiosity. Antoine, particularly, seemed advanced in his explorations of shamanism and New Age beliefs. As Antoine's birthday approached, Karim's gift sparked their collective desire for an experiment: a Ouija board. That evening, in Antoine's darkened house, illuminated only by candlelight, they conducted their first session. The storyteller, despite his horror film knowledge, remained a skeptic, expecting nothing. But the planchette began to move almost immediately. Karim, taking the lead, asked basic questions. Despite their skepticism, they maintained a respectful demeanor. Still, our narrator suspected the ideomotor effect subconscious muscle movements. Karim suggested he remove his fingers and ask questions only he could know the answer to. In a moment of naive bravado, he asked to speak to a family member, and a name slowly formed on the board: his grandfather, who had passed away 2 years prior. A chilling dread washed over him. He'd never mentioned his grandfather to his friends. To be absolutely certain, he pressed for details, questions that Antoine and Karim could not possibly know. Every answer fit. Confused and utterly drained, they ended the session. The initial exhaustion was just the beginning. Subsequent sessions, surprisingly, became more cynical, imprecise, and even mocking. The narrator, now convinced they were genuinely communicating, found things rapidly going wrong in his own life. After one session, an excruciating tightness in his chest left him on the verge of vomiting. He became irritable and nasty, inexplicably lashing out at his friends. Karim later recounted a classroom incident where the narrator had spoken to him so cruelly he'd been genuinely hurt, an interaction our narrator had no memory of whatsoever. He experienced intense mood swings, baffling those close to him. Even as a non-believer, a creeping dread began to take root, making him fear dark places and question his own rationality. These unsettling events, fluctuating in intensity, persisted for 2 long years. External manifestations became undeniable. During a session at his own flat, Karim boldly requested a physical manifestation, and instantly, multiple loud bangs erupted from his wall, a wall with no neighbors behind it. On another occasion, after a question about something he couldn't recall, the board chillingly spelled death. Simultaneously, a candle on his furniture extinguished itself, only to relight moments after the session concluded. Karim, thankfully, filmed this. The narrator also began to frequently see small, swift shadows from the corner of his eye in specific spots around his flat, often in the early afternoon. He remembered similar fleeting shadows from his youth, a memory reinforced when his father confessed to similar sightings. One afternoon, doing housework, he saw a woman in white staring at him from the street, only for her to vanish a moment later. Another time, in his gloomy cellar, he encountered what he initially thought was a neighbor, a man wearing a hat. He turned to greet him, but the man simply wasn't there. Research later revealed the unsettling phenomenon known as the Hat Man. While watching a series and eating, a piece of bread on his table inexplicably jumped 10 centimeters before settling back in the exact same spot. He considered an earthquake, but nothing else had moved. His friends, predictably, laughed at his account. Over 5 years in that flat, 2 relationships ended, partially due to the haunting. One ex panicked after seeing the bathroom door open by itself. Another, a rational soul, was utterly confused by the same phenomenon. The door, naturally, closed due to a floor incline, but in these instances, it had opened against its natural inclination. An empty water bottle, placed beside the bin, once rolled across the floor to his feet. Even the television proved a conduit. While cooking with an ex, the volume on their cheap television, with its faulty remote, drastically increased. The remote wasn't even in their hands. It happened again the next day, episodically, as if someone was repeatedly pressing the button. One evening, after a church visit with Kareem, our narrator stepped outside for a moment, seeing Kareem still seated in the front row. A distraction caught his eye, and when he looked back, Kareem was already leaving the church. He questioned how he could have exited so quickly, to which Kareem replied he'd simply gotten up when the narrator did, a physically impossible feat given the layout. Then came the mysterious rosaries. Kareem, leaving his apartment, called him down immediately after nearly stepping on a rosary on the doorstep. 2 weeks later, another wooden rosary appeared on his own doormat. He still has it. For 2 years, the narrator believed he was losing his mind. He swore off Ouija boards and all forms of divination. As his life changed, and he grew closer to Christianity, the disturbing events subsided. This profound 2-year struggle highlights the often unseen and deeply personal cost of inviting the unknown into your life. Could you imagine a presence actively changing your personality, intruding on your most private moments, and leaving you questioning your sanity? What's more unsettling, an object moving, or your own mind being subtly altered? Finally, we turn to a story that defies traditional hauntings, offering a unique, long-term perspective on living alongside a spectral entity and the lasting impact such connections can leave. Our last account takes us to an old house in the Midwest, once a hotel, purchased for a steal. Growing up, the narrator experienced the typical, easy-to-ignore paranormal fare: footsteps, shadows, a chilling basement room, the feeling of being watched. But it was during a visit from his family, after he'd moved out, that his sister made an extraordinary revelation. They had met a ghost in the house. Her radio had been acting up, so she playfully addressed the unseen presence, asking it to stop. The radio turned off. "If you're a ghost, turn it back on," she challenged. It did. Through a series of ingenious experiments, they devised a communication system. Volume up for yes, volume down for no. The digital volume readout, from 0 to 30, corresponded to letters of the alphabet: 1, A, 2, Ebo, 3, C, and so on. If the radio turned off, it signified a hard no or an off-limits question. Through this system, the ghost revealed himself as Jason, a 5-year-old who died in the house in 1905 from illness. He claimed to live there with his kind mother and an evil father. When asked if he loved his father, the volume dropped to 0 and the radio shut off, a stark refusal, confirming the father was the source of the house's more malevolent activity. Our narrator, initially skeptical, returned home eager to experience it, but Jason refused to interact with him. The radio would instantly shut off when he entered the room or when his sisters called him while he was nearby. Reflecting on this, He remembered a terrifying incident from before he moved out, a playful hand ruffling his hair in bed, which he had reacted to with a panicked, overconfident outburst, yelling threats. In response, picture frames on his desk violently flew to the floor. He realized this might have been Jason's attempt at introduction. One night, after Jason's continued silence towards him, the narrator spoke aloud, apologizing for his past reaction, admitting his fear, and asking if he was the Jason everyone talked about. The radio turned on. Volume up. Did I yell at you that night? Volume up. Then back down to a reasonable level. I'm sorry. Can we be friends? Volume up again. It was incredible. Jason even proved his authenticity to family friends. He would ring the doorbell or push crayons around on the table. He claimed he could travel anywhere almost instantly. To test this, they called a family friend on the West Coast, who placed a newspaper on their kitchen table. Moments later, the radio turned off at home, then clicked back on, setting the volume to 17, the exact date of the newspaper, later confirmed by the friend after Jason stubbornly insisted on it. Jason refused questions about God or religion and sometimes gave contradictory answers, like claiming he didn't need sleep, despite telling his sister he did months earlier. Most profoundly, he seemed to know how long he would remain. He communicated to his sister that he would be around until her 28th birthday, at which point his family would move on. And true to his word, years later, when she reached that age, they never heard from him again. During his time, Jason occasionally visited their dreams. Realistic visions of a boy in a white hooded robe, playing hide and seek, asking questions, dreams Jason later confirmed he had caused. In his final years, he even became adept at manipulating other electronics. This decades-long communication, living alongside a spectral entity, provides a fascinating, yet cautionary, look at the profound and often unpredictable nature of the unseen. It forces us to ask, what truly lies beyond the veil? How do these entities choose to interact? And what are the lasting echoes they leave in our lives? Is the supernatural always terrifying? Or can it become, in its own strange way, a part of our reality? The sheer diversity of these experiences reminds us that the unknown is vast and multifaceted, stretching far beyond the simple act of inviting it in. If you're still awake, thank you for braving the dark with us tonight on Midnight Whispers. If these stories stirred something in you, a chill, a memory, a shadow, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more true horrors, and ring the bell so you never miss a whisper from the night. Sleep tight, if you can.